the need to plan? If everything will be what will be, and everything is fate, what is the need to do anything? What is the reason to do anything then? Why do we need to do anything? If it's all gonna come together without us having to do anything, then what's the need to go to school? What's the need to educate ourselves? It's all gonna come together, right? You have to be like this because some people are so literal when it comes to fate. Fate, fate. They think that everything just falls together as it should, and if it didn't work out, if we failed, then that was supposed to happen as it did, and we just have what we have because it was supposed to be like that. That's not true. So people going to jail, it was supposed to be like that. People incarcerated right now, it was supposed to be like that. No, they made bad decisions. Your history and the progression of your history is based all on decisions. No different than the person that makes bad decisions and ends up in jail. It's no different than the people that make good decisions and build good history in their community and country. So what you have as far as history and everything that you have here that has happened has been the collective decisions of America, whether they be bad or whether they be good. So I'm trying to show you where everything went wrong. And the generation to blame, hear me very good. When I looked at everything and I looked at all these, so you got to have it all before you like I do. See, I got all these generations before me. You got to look at it. You got to write them down and look at it. Text them in your phone and look at them. However you look at information. You need to look at all these generations and you will see where we went wrong. You would just see it because you would look at the dates where stuff happened. That's a 7. You would look at the dates where we were destroyed and torn apart in our community. That's a 7. And you will understand where we went wrong, where we made wrong decisions and why we are where we are. And when I looked at it, the baby boomers generation, baby boomers 1 and 2, I would say, is responsible for the failure of America. Because they were the children of the Malcolm X's and the Martin Luther King Jr.'s and all the people of that energy. All those people that soaked it up, the parents, all the counterparts of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, all the people listening to their message was basically the silent generation, and the baby boomers were the children of the people listening. So the people that was going to see Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., they were the silent generation. Many of them were the silent generation. Their children that would be taught the information that they got from Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. You see where I'm going with this? And Louis Farrakhan. Though the children that will receive this information taught by their parents was the baby boomers. So therefore, they were the generation to take the information and run with it that Malcolm X was talking about, Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about. They were the generation next up to grow up. You get it? They weren't grown yet. They were the children. They were the ones to take the information. They were the ones to take the experiences that they saw. They were the one to take all the stuff they seen happen during the times of Martin Luther King Jr. and the times of Malcolm X. And by the time they got older, they would get that history. They were the ones to take the information and all of that and run with it. That would be the baby boomers. That wouldn't be my generation. See, what we did here in America, we sit up here and say, well, you should look at history. This is what older people do. You should look at history. They get on us, Generation X. You should look at history and you should learn from history. Well, you didn't do it, did you? Well, you're what? Well, look. You're the baby boomers. You literally was the ones that was there as children. And you grew up in that energy. That's a 7. You grew up in that vibration. That's a 7. You grew up all around it. The baby boomers was the only generation that grew up all around that. They were the kids. They were the teenagers. Listen, they were the babies. They were the ones that were born. They were the ones that were around the kids that grew up around that time when Martin Luther King Jr. was rallying around and Malcolm X was teaching. They were the ones that were going to be the recipients of that information and that energy. That was the baby boomers. Now, were they necessarily teenagers? Well, by the time, look, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were assassinated around 68. So yeah, they were all in the mix of that. They were all in the mix of that because the baby boomers were from 1946, to 1964. So their cutoff time, the new generation, Generation X, started 1965. My generation started 1965. We were 3 years into Generation X by the time Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. So when the baby boomers generation ended was 1964. That was the last year. So the last year that could be considered a baby boomer was 1964. So 4 years later, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were assassinated, which means even the last year of the baby boomer generation literally seen Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated because they were 4 years old. The last year of baby boomers was 64. So that means the last year of the baby boomer generation, that last year, if you were born that last year, you was 4 years old when Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. So you literally seen these great men that everyone was rallying around at 4 years old, and then they died. And you literally was around this energy watching all of this. So you was still receiving spiritual deposits. You was receiving energy deposits. The baby boomers were all around that energy. That's what I'm trying to show you. Because they went back to 1946. Right? So if you were born in 1946, and that's the first year of the baby boomers, and Malcolm X was killed, and Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in 1968. That means you was 22 years old when Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X was killed. You was a fresh, young 22-year-old kid. If you would, again, listen to this very closely, guys. This is very important. The first year of baby boomers generation was 1946. So if you was born the first year that the baby boomer generation started, when Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, you was 22 years old, which means your eyes and ears was totally open to everything that was going on. You was receiving the energy. That was your time. You was in your prime. You was in your prime when they died. That's a 7. If you was born the first year of the baby boomers generation, that would be 1946, right? By the time you grew up and all of that, and you were literally 22, you seen Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated. You was right in the middle of it. And guess who was your children? After you seen all of that at 22 years old? Generation X, which was my generation. So you were supposed to take all you seen, all that energy, everything you absorbed, you were supposed to take that and install that into Generation X. And this is what I'm trying to show you. This is why I say they failed us, because they was right there. How you looking at the rest of the generations talking about You was right there with all this energy, and then guess what you didn't do? You didn't pass on any information. You ain't tell us nothing. You ain't do as far as and I'm not talking about my parents. I'm talking about the whole generation. When I look at Generation X, you did not share the information, your experience, your wisdom. You didn't pour that into the next generation. Obviously, looking at Generation X, look, which started from 1965. So look at that. From 1965 to 1984. You see that right there? That generation, now you see why I say that's the sweet spot. 1965 to 1984. Now look at those dates. Listen, for all people that are older, for all people that are in their mid-30s and up, that's why I'm saying, that's why I try to tell you, it's not going to be the young generation start the revolution, it's going to be the old generation. Because when you hear these dates, Generation X, 1965, already right there in the middle of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and what they was doing. That's when our generation started. In 1965, that's when this generation called Generation X started. 1965. Everybody know how America was in 1965. And the kids born in that time was in a special place because Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. was going all around the country during that time. So the kids in that time wasn't important. They were supposed to be the recipients of all of that. That's a 7. Now you see what I'm saying. I hope you do. Okay? The baby boomers were the recipients of all of that Martin Luther King Jr. received. Now, excuse me. Generation X, born 1965. We also were kids when they were killed. If you were born in Generation X, 1965, some of you were 3 years old when Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. died. The baby boomers were all in their energy when they died. When they were either young or they were older, in their 20s. Baby boomers. They were either in their 22, that's the first generation. The first year of that generation. That's 1946. If you were born that first year of the baby boomers generation, by the time Malcolm X was assassinated, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, you were 22. That's the first year if you were born the first year that starts the baby boomers generation, which is 1946. By 1968, which was the year that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, you were 22. So you grew up all in that. In Generation X, we came along and we were even kids in that. We were babies though. We were like 2 or 3 years old. We were receiving, therefore, spiritual energy, spiritual deposits only. We couldn't really receive information deposits. We were receiving spiritual atmosphere energy deposits. We even got a little bit of that. Our generation, do you see what I'm going with this? We even got a little bit of that. We even received some of the spiritual deposits because we were born 1965, starting our generation. They were assassinated by 1968. So we received spiritual deposits from that. We didn't receive information deposits because we weren't old enough. Most of us wasn't old enough. Our generation started in 1965. All we could have been was 3 years old at best. Generation X could have only been 3 years old, 3-year-old children at best when Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were assassinated. But we were there. My generation was there. But the top of our generation, the oldest of our generation, could only receive spiritual deposits, atmosphere deposits from what happened. The good energy and the bad energy, the assassinations and all of that, the change that was brought about. We only received spiritual deposits, which in some cases are we can't comprehend. They have mysterious details, mysteries, mysterious details that we have to reveal, that has to be revealed in mysteries. It's very deep. Okay. But Generation X could only receive spiritual deposits, atmosphere deposits, energy deposits, vibrational deposits from that, from being only 3 years old when Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. But our parents' generation was right there soaking it all up. They were the children during the time. The Generation X parents, our parents, were the children during that time. 1964 was the first year, 1946 was the first year of baby boomers generation. So the first year, I have to stress this, the first year, right, was 1946, which means, again, I got to stress this, by the time MLK and Malcolm X was assassinated, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X was assassinated, the baby boomer generation, which started at 1946, the first year that started, that generation was at best, the oldest of them were 22. That's the best way to put it. The oldest of Generation Baby Boomer 1 generation, the first generation of baby boomer, there's 2 generations, starting at 1946 and 1954. That's the first baby boomer generation. The second baby boomer generation is 1955 to 1964. The first baby boomer generation, the top of that generation, starting from 1946 at best, the oldest of that generation was 22 years old when Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. died. This is important because obviously at that age, they seen it all, they understood it all, they comprehended it all. Now, Generation X, of those 22-year-old kids that saw Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., Generation X was their children. And they were supposed to give us what they absorbed and the information that they got and the vibration that they got, hands-on, literally looking at Malcolm X, literally looking at Martin Luther King Jr., literally in their presence. They were supposed to take that and give it to us, their children, the children being Generation X, and we were supposed to be the revolution. With all of the people, the parents giving their children all of that energy, all that they absorbed from Martin Luther King Jr., all that they absorbed from the civil rights movement, all that they absorbed, they were supposed to give to Generation X. And what we were supposed to do with it? We were supposed to start the revolution. See where I'm going with this? The most important generations here in America, if you don't walk away with understanding anything, the most important generations was baby boomers, as far as what we were supposed to do after the silent generation. The most helpful generation, the most revolutionary generation would be the silent generation, starting at 1928 to 1945. That would be the most important, helpful, resourceful, revolutionary generation. And the next two generations were supposed to be the ones that continued the revolution. Now you see what I'm saying. So it's the silent generation, the baby boomers, and the Generation X that were supposed to do it all. Those three generations. Most important generations of America. Again, the silent generation, 1928 to 1945, the baby boomers generation, 1946 to 1964. Just listen to the dates. Anybody to know the history of America. Generation X, 1965 to 1984. And you can even go to the millennials, from 1981 to 1995. But after that, after the millennials, I would say it's 4 generations. And after that, you got Generation Z and then Generation Alpha, which is present day generation, the kids now. Those 4 generations were are the ones that were supposed to change everything. Don't you see? Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't up there for no reason. They were up there for revolution purposes. That's a 7. Oh, yeah. See, that's it right there. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. was up there in front of the country not to entertain you. I'm not here to entertain you. It offends me when you think I'm here to entertain you. I'm not here to tap dance for you like I'm tap dancing for white folks. I am here to inform you. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were not here to entertain you. They were here for revolution. And then after that was the baby boomers. Those were the kids that were supposed to receive the energy and the information of the revolution. And we were their children, Generation X, which we were supposed to officially start the revolution. Not the millennials. I would say the millennials could keep it going, kind of, but it was really Generation X. And when you understand this, you are breaking down now generations. Instead of looking and saying what went wrong, I'm showing you how it went wrong. Instead of being jaded about it and not really knowing how it happened and it being vague to you, it's not vague anymore now that I break it down to generations, is it? It's not vague anymore to you, is it? Because now you see who's responsible. That's a 7. You tried to blame Generation X. How you blaming us? You was in the middle of the revolution. Everybody's responsible for what they do and they don't do. What you want me to go? You want me to get in a time machine and go get the information and start the revolution myself and teach me teach my generation what they supposed to do? Come back and teach my generation? You were supposed to teach us, baby boomers, Generation X. You were supposed to pass, us being Generation X, you, baby boomers, were supposed to pass the baton, pass the energy, but you didn't do that. You took and absorbed, listen to this part closely. You took and absorbed all that you got from Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. and you hoarded it and you became lords among us and you didn't pass the throne and you didn't pass the baton. See what you got to understand is the throne is never meant to be sat on forever. That's a 7. Oh, you don't supposed to sit on the throne forever. And that's what the problem was. The baby boomers sat there on the throne forever. You didn't want the Generation X to sit on the throne. You were arrogant, you were cocky, and you were hoarding information. You were hoarding energy. You were hoarding ranks. You were hoarding power and authority, and you did not pass the baton to Generation X. Oh, I know I'm right about it. Because now I'm going beyond color. You hear me? Did you hear me mention any black or white? That part, that's a 7, Al. You didn't hear me mention any color, did you? I said the whole generation. I said the human beings in that generation here in America. Generation baby boomer. I don't care what color you was. You were the people that were there absorbing the recipients of the revolution, and you did not pass on none of that information properly to Generation X, which would have been officially the kids of the revolution, the people of the revolution. Now, I'm going to show you why you didn't do it. Because it's more complicated than you would like to think, or that you know, or that you have been aware of. The reason why you didn't pass you know the reason why you didn't pass the baton? Let's look at your generation. 1946, huh? So by 1968, you was in your 20s. 1968 in your 20s. Now let's look at what was going on in 1968 and you 20-something years old. That the music, the rock and roll, and the drugs. Now you see where I'm going with this. "22 years old in 1968. So by the time you was 32, it was 1978. So you was 32 in 1978. So by the time it was 1988, you was 42. You was 42, about my age. I'm 41 right now. You was about my age in 1988. You know what you was doing? You was getting high. You was getting high, smoking crack, getting high, listen to rock and roll, listen to hip hop, listen to R&B songs, grooving and jiving, shucking and jiving, going to the clubs. Look at it, 88, you was 42. Baby boomers were 88 and 42. I mean, they were 42 and 88. Baby boomers were 42 years old in 1988. Now put it all together. Everybody know the history. Most Americans got a timeline in their head. You got this thing in your head, right? Where you can see all the years. Us intelligent people, we got timelines in our head. I can see all the time in my head. I can go to the 80s. I can go to the 90s. It's in my brain. It's there. It's like literally there, like land, like land in my head. And I can go from the 80s, the 90s, and I go to the 70s, and I got all the history there. I got good parts of the history. And when I look at 88, and you was what, 42? Oh, that was a sweet spot in America. You was 42 and 88. That's fairly still young. You got plenty of experience. You probably had a couple kids. Now you experimenting with drugs. Why you got those kids? Which was us, Generation X. That's a 7 out. And this is why you didn't pass the baton. It wasn't just because you were arrogant. Part of it was that. A lot of it was that. But you also have to incorporate the drug culture that was in full throttle by 88. By 1974, free-base cocaine came on the scene. Free-base cocaine in the Wikipedia. If you look up the Wikipedia, if you go to Wikipedia and you look up cocaine, free-base cocaine. Free-base cocaine, for people that don't know, is usually ammonia, ether, and cocaine put together and smoked. They put together ammonia, what they call ether, and cocaine, and it comes together and it makes like feta cheese. It comes together and crumble up like feta cheese, and that is free-base, and that is probably what inspired crack cocaine, was free-base cocaine. It's safe to say. And that started in 1974. Okay? 1974, baby boomers were born what? 1946. So they were almost what, 30 years old? They were 28 when Freebasing came out. Baby boomers were I'm trying to show you what happened, guys. Because no, you know what the historians ain't doing? They ain't doing this part. I'm doing it for you. I'm being the historian that you need, the real historian, the 100 historian. I'm the historian going 100 on it. The baby boomers were 28 when Freebasing came out. That's a 7. What you think they was doing over there in California? That's what Freebasing basically was. What you think they was over there doing? Freebasing. 28 years old. That's the baby boomers. They were 28 years old when Freebasing hit the scene. Now you put that together. Crack cocaine came right after that. They were 42 in 1988. Crack cocaine already hit the scene, right? That's what happened. And the white culture, they were doing what they were doing too. They were doing cocaine, they were doing heroin and LSD and all of that in between. That was the baby boomers as well. And that's why everybody was up in smoke. The music was great. The partying and the sex was great. And they totally failed Generation X. That's a 7. This is where we went wrong, folks. Excuse me. This is why it looks the way it looks. Now you got it? I hope you do. Because you want to blame a race. I'm showing you to everybody. Black, white, everybody. Spanish, everybody.